Alright, welcome to the channel. My name is Viper and this is going to be the first video of my new series, Political Ideology Basics. I know this is a bit different from my other videos, but the reason I decided to make this series is that even though I am interested in politics now, back in the day in high school, I would fall asleep during politics class, so I feel like I am missing some basics. And I'm pretty sure that a lot of you out there had the same issue. Also, there's a lot of opinions about political ideologies out there, which are often based on quote-unquote common sense, and that just doesn't do these ideologies justice. As I mentioned in other videos, I want to bring balance to YouTube, and I thought having a neutral view on the basic political ideologies definitely aligns with that goal. Also, the more knowledge my community has, the better. So let's go. In this series, I will attempt to shed light and raise awareness about political ideologies. As you will see, they are incredibly complex and it is not easy to just classify them based on common sense or based on what people say on TV shows. But because I slept through most politics classes and I'm not studying political science right now, I had to buy a book about political ideologies to understand all of them fully. I am also not the type of person that is satisfied with kind of knowing things on the surface, so I really wanted to understand things. That's why I thought a book would be a good starting point. I am also happy to announce that we got a new addition to the channel. Why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Nova, and I'm Viper's AI assistant. I will be responsible for breaking down things Viper is too stupid to understand by himself. Just kidding. Or am I?
Yeah, I'm not sure I would put it like that, but whatever. Nova, can you start off by explaining the audience a bit about the book that is going to be the source for this video?
Sure. Political Ideologies. An Introduction is a comprehensive textbook authored by Robert Eccleshall, Vincent Geoghegan, Richard J., Michael Keeney, Ian Mackenzie, and Richard Wilf. The book provides a clear and accessible introduction to the complexities of political ideologies. It introduces and considers the future of all the most widely studied ideologies: liberalism, conservatism, socialism, democracy, nationalism, fascism, ecologism, and feminism. Each ideology is set clearly within its historical and political context. The latest edition of the book includes a new final chapter that examines the impact of recent theoretical developments of ideologies and charts. The challenges that they face in the 21st century. The book has been fully revised and updated, and provides an annotated guide for further reading. This book is used by scholars and students of political ideologies. It's a useful resource for anyone interested in understanding the historical context, key concepts, and evolution of major political ideologies. It's also beneficial for those studying politics, international relations, and related fields. As for the neutrality and accuracy of the book, it's important to note that any text on political ideologies will inevitably reflect the perspectives and interpretations of its authors. However, the authors of Political Ideologies, An Introduction are respected scholars in the field, and the book is widely used in academic settings, which suggests a general consensus on its credibility and objectivity. That said, readers are always encouraged to approach any text with a critical eye and consider multiple sources when studying complex subjects like political ideologies. Please note that this is a general observation, and for a more specific critique or review, you might want to look at academic reviews or feedback from readers.
As you can see, the book is the real deal and the information it delivers should be largely accurate and based on consensus. Now, I will try my very best to keep this series objective and neutral. I still want to tell you which ideology suits me best for transparency's sake. I personally agree most with the ideas of social liberalism. We will learn in the course of this video what values social liberals adhere to. Okay, before we start, I would really appreciate a like, comment and a subscribe. This video was a lot of work in terms of research and also editing. Alright, let's get it. Can we make it to 5 subscribers? Finding the origins of liberal thought is not particularly easy. However, most approaches start by taking a closer look at the 17th century and the Enlightenment of the 18th century. However, it was only in the 19th century that liberalism became a distinct political ideology, and liberals of this century criticized the privileges of the noble elites. They strongly advocated for individual rights and free trade. They also emphasized the importance of constitutional and limited government. By the end of the 19th century, a social form of liberalism became relevant. That's the type of liberalism that I agree with most. Those social liberals condemned poverty and influenced the birth of a welfare state. We'll hear more about this and other strands of liberalism that developed over the time later in this video. Once we reach the 21st century, liberalism becomes so deeply integrated into culture, economics and politics that it can be difficult to distinguish between ideology and practice. As I mentioned, defining liberalism can be difficult because it's often used very flexible both by people who like the idea of liberalism as well as critics. Nova, can you tell that funny quote of this Ryan A. dude that lays out how liberals came up with unrealistic definitions of their ideology?
Sure, Viper. I got you covered. Here's the quote. Liberals have often defined liberalism in such a way that only the very deluded or the very wicked could fail to be liberals. Ryan A., 2012. The Making of Modern Liberalism. Princeton University Press.
Yeah, I don't know. I think that's pretty funny. I also brought you an example for this, but I'll let Nova handle that.
Liberals have described liberalism as the doctrine that respects the dignity and well-being of individuals, or as a theory that favors freedom, or as an ideology that opposes authoritarianism. None of these points are hard to agree with, are they?
Yeah. As you can see, these are very incomplete and euphemistic statements that probably don't fully paint the whole picture. Critics, on the contrary, frequently scrutinize liberal concepts by pinpointing deficiencies in current practices or institutional setups. They think that because these societies are characterized as liberal, liberals support these societies and their structures. However, there are two themes which stay central in liberalism. These are individualism and toleration. I'll cover these two closer in a few minutes, so stay tuned.
Hey, you there in the back? Wake up! Viper will tell you dum-dums about the complex origin of liberalism next.
Thanks, Nova. Before transitioning to the origin point, I want to mention that liberalism is a pretty flexible ideology. It's complex and there are only few fixed points of agreement. For instance, liberals have different opinions on a range of important topics, like how much power the government should have, the role of the welfare state, what freedom really means, whether society can progress, and how important private property is. Liberalism is a political ideology of the modern era. Initially, it took shape in Europe after feudalism started to fall apart and aristocratic privilege began to decline. But hold up, Nova, can you quickly explain what modern era is and what aristocratic privilege means?
Of course, Viper. This is going to take a while, though. The modern era, also known as modern history or modern times, is the period of human history that succeeds the post-classical era, which ended around 1500 AD, up to the present. This terminology is a historical periodization that is applied primarily to European and Western history. The modern era can be further divided as follows. The early modern period lasted from 1500 to 1800 and resulted in wide-ranging intellectual, political, and economic change. The late modern period began around 1800 with the end of the political revolutions in the late 18th century. Contemporary history refers to the period following the end of World War II in 1945 and continuing to the present. On the other hand, aristocratic privilege refers to the rights, advantages, or immunities enjoyed by a small privileged class, often referred to as the aristocracy. Aristocracy is a form of government in which power is held by a relatively small, privileged class, or by a minority, consisting of those presumed to be best qualified to rule. Aristocratic status can involve feudal or legal privileges. They are usually below only the monarch of a country or nation in its social hierarchy. Most often, aristocrats inherit their positions, often through centuries of family lineage. This method reflects the ancient but unfounded belief that members of some families are genetically more fit to rule than others. Aristocrats, especially in governmental aristocracies, may be chosen based on their superior intellect and proven leadership ability. Aristocrats may also be selected by favor, the granting of high rank by monarchs to individuals who have served them best. Finally, positions within the aristocracy may be based purely on personal wealth, either earned or inherited. For all of you who got bored, here is your last chance. Let me summarize. The modern era spans from around 1500 AD to the present, characterized by significant changes in Europe and the West. It includes the early modern period, 1500, 1800, marked by intellectual, political, and economic shifts. Late modern period, from around 1800, following political revolutions and history, since 1945. Aristocratic privilege refers to the rights and advantages enjoyed by a small, privileged class known as the aristocracy. They hold power in government, often based on inherited status or favor from monarchs. Aristocrats may be selected for intellect, leadership, or personal wealth.
Nice, now we got some context. Let's go on with the video. Who exactly the founders of liberalism are is not fully clear. However, some liberal ideas are found in the early modern period, especially in the writings of two English philosophers. The first is Thomas Hobbes, who lived from 1588 to 1679. Interestingly, Hobbes firmly opposed many ideals which later became important to liberals, such as freedom of conscience, the separation of church and state, and the doctrine of limited government. But he also had ideas which would later become essential for liberals. He had an individualistic concept of society. He claimed that individuals are by nature equals. He assumed that restricting natural freedom must be justified. He viewed the state as artificial rather than natural. And he had a distinctive belief in political freedom. The second philosopher who played a big role in laying the groundworks for liberalism was John Locke. This dude lived from 1632 till 1704. So John rejected political absolutism, advocated for a limited government, argued that legitimate political power is grounded on consent, insisted that men have natural rights which governments must respect. By the way, the term men back in the day was used as a gender-neutral term. Nova, tell him.
Yes. It was common in the past for writers and philosophers to use the term men as a general reference to humanity or people in general, without specifically excluding women. This usage reflected the linguistic conventions of the time, where the term men was often used in a gender-neutral or inclusive sense.
Okay, good. Now that that's done, let's continue. He was of the opinion that men put themselves under government primarily for the purpose of preserving property. He also thought that men have the right to overthrow the government if it started to turn against the people. What's interesting is that some of Locke's ideas were taken by American revolutionaries, particularly by yet another Thomas Paine. He lived from 1737 till 1809. Tommy was inspired by Locke and argued that government is created by men to uphold their natural rights and that people have the right to overthrow a reigning government if it fails to do so. Although the French revolutionaries took much of their inspiration from ideas outside the liberal tradition, their central document, the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen, 1789, shared values with liberals. For example, the desire to overthrow aristocratic privilege and the project to establish limited government and religious toleration. Some other philosophers who impacted liberal thinking were from the Enlightenment period. Nova, what's the Enlightenment?
The Enlightenment, also known as the Age of Reason, was an intellectual and philosophical movement that took place in Europe, especially Western Europe, during the 17th and 18th centuries. This era was characterized by a range of ideas centered on the value of human happiness, the pursuit of knowledge obtained by means of reason and the evidence of the senses, and ideals such as natural law, liberty, progress, toleration, fraternity, constitutional government, and separation of church and state. Key figures of the Enlightenment include Francis Bacon, Immanuel Kant, Friedrich Nicolai, and Jean-Jacques Rousseau. The Enlightenment was preceded by the Scientific Revolution and the work of Francis Bacon and John Locke. Among others, the Enlightenment undermined the authority of the monarchy and religious officials and paved the way for the political revolutions of the 18th and 19th centuries. A variety of 19th century movements, including liberalism and socialism, trace their intellectual heritage to the Enlightenment.
Thanks. So, these Enlightenment philosophers were of the opinion that reason enables us to understand and improve the world, liberating us from custom and tradition. However, as I mentioned earlier, the term liberal only appeared later in history. One scholar identifies the 1830s as the point at which we begin to encounter the fully self-conscious liberal ideology. This man was Vincent A. 2010, Modern Political Ideologies, 3rd edition, Oxford, Blackwell. In 1859, a guy named John Stuart Mill published his famous On Liberty. In it, he defended individual liberty in all political thought. Nova, can you read us an important section out of Mill's On Liberty?
Sure. The sole end for which mankind are warranted, individually or collectively, in interfering with the liberty of action of any of their number, is self-protection. The only purpose for which power can be rightfully exercised over any member of a civilized community, against his will, is to prevent harm to others. His own good, either physical or moral, is not a sufficient warrant. Over himself, over his own body and mind, the individual is sovereign.
It is interesting to see that liberalism developed differently in different countries. For example, in England, liberalism retained a broadly laissez-faire character until the end of the 19th century. But hold up, what's laissez-faire?
Laissez-faire is a French phrase that literally means let do or allow to do. It's a policy or attitude of letting things take their own course without interfering. In economics, laissez-faire describes a system where the government takes a hands-off approach, interfering as little as possible in the economic affairs of individuals and society. This concept is often associated with free market capitalism, where businesses operate without government regulation. The idea behind laissez-faire is that markets function best when left alone, as they are most efficient at allocating resources. However, this approach has been debated and critiqued, as it can lead to economic disparities. So, in a nutshell, laissez-faire is all about freedom in the economic sphere, letting businesses and individuals make their own decisions without government interference.
All right, thanks Nova. As I mentioned, in England, this approach was prominent until the end of the 19th century. In France, on the other hand, a more democratic strand of liberalism developed. The English idealist Tom Hill Green, from 1836 to 1882, argued for public health care and a public education system, on the grounds that both would promote the freedom of the disadvantaged. This social strand within liberalism favored a wider range of social rights, including pensions for the elderly, a minimum wage for workers, and welfare for the unemployed. By the early 20th century, liberalism had adapted itself to some of the challenges posed by the socialist movement. I will make a separate video on socialism soon, so subscribe if you're interested in content like this. Anyways, the liberalists of this century began to modify the laissez-faire approach and incorporated a commitment to social equality. By the end of the 20th century, under the influence of liberal egalitarian philosophers such as John Rawls, 1921 to 2002, liberalism was to become increasingly identified with the concept of distributive justice. We will work out the differences between egalitarian liberals and libertarians later. But for now, let's get to the individualism and individuality. Liberals do not share a single view about human nature, but most liberals have a quote, vision of society as in some sense constituted by individuals for the fulfillment of the ends which were primarily individual. Taylor C., 1985, Philosophy and Human Sciences, Cambridge, Cambridge University Press. Yeah, I don't know what that means either. Nova, can you explain what this quote means?
Sure, let's break it down. This quote is basically saying that society is made up of individuals, each with their own goals and dreams. And the purpose of society, in a way, is to help each person achieve those individual goals. Think of it like a football team. Each player has their own role and goals, like the goalkeeper wanting to block shots and the striker wanting to score. But they all come together to form a team, and the team's purpose is to help each player do their best and win the game. It's the same with society. We're all individuals doing our own thing, but we're also part of a bigger team, and the team, society, is there to help us all succeed. Hope that helps.
Nice, that's a great explanation. Thanks, Nova. Liberal individualism is a multifaceted doctrine which combines these following four ideas. Each individual is equally important. Each individual is a separate unit. Individuals are, in some sense, prior to and more important than society. Social, political, and economic arrangements are to be evaluated according to how well individuals fare within them. Liberals have been divided between two issues when it comes to individualism: the proper relationship between the individual, state, and society, and the philosophical grounds of individualism. Let's break down the different stances on the proper relationship between the individual, state, and society first. On one side of the scale, there are liberals that believe that individualism and collectivism are essentially in conflict with one another. Libertarians of the 20th century, for example, argued that redistributive taxation is exploited because it treats some people as means to the good of others. Nova, roll up the quote.
Using a person for the benefit of others does not sufficiently respect and take account for the fact that he is a separate person, that his is the only life he has. Robert Nozick, 1974.
On the other side, there are liberals that challenge this claim. The authors argued that the principles of libertarianism present a less attractive version of how society should function, overlooking a crucial concept like collective welfare and civic morality. What's civic virtue or civic morality, Nova?
So, civic virtue is all about being a good citizen. It's like the personal qualities or habits that help a society to work well. Think of it like being a good team player in a sports team. Just like how every player needs to know their role, play fair, and support their teammates for the team to win. In a society, every citizen needs to do their part for the society to function smoothly. This could mean different things, like obeying laws, voting, paying taxes, helping others, or even just being informed about what's going on in the world. The idea is that we're all in this together, and each of us has a part to play in making our society a better place.
Thanks. An example for this is social liberalism. At the end of the 19th century, it connected the good of the individual to the social provision of welfare. However, both the positions of libertarians and social liberals are still liberal because they don't allocate priority to collective goals over individual ones. Okay, let's talk about the conflicting ideas within liberalism when it comes to the philosophical grounds of individualism. Two main groups can be identified. One version of liberalism, which is prominent amongst contemporary North American liberals, and other version of liberalism called egalitarian liberals. Let's talk about the North American version. This version of liberal philosophy has been strongly influenced by Immanuel Kant. They believe that, quote from the book, human beings are autonomous and rational agents, to be treated as ends in themselves and never only as means to the ends of others. Yeah, I will need to know to break this down for us.
When we say human beings are autonomous and rational agents, we're saying that people have the ability to make their own decisions and think things through. Now, the part about being treated as ends in themselves, and never only as means to the ends of others, is a bit more complex. It's basically saying that the good of society, or any other group, should not be placed above the individual.
Okay, got it. Thanks for the breakdown. Like I mentioned, egalitarian liberals are the other group. They believe that the idea of separateness of persons of Immanuel Kant aligns with the idea that citizens have significant responsibilities towards each other, which includes the obligation to ensure fair distribution of resources or wealth. That pretty much concludes the chapter of individualism. However, there are two quotes in the book which I believe are interesting. After that, we will get to the next topic, which is toleration and religion. Nova, take it away.
Quote 1. Individuality is also about being true to oneself, listening to one's inner voice, and discovering a way of living that is consistent with one's own authentic nature. John Stuart Mill. Quote 2. For Wilhelm von Humboldt, the ideal society was, each strives to develop himself from his own inmost nature and for his own sake. Wilhelm von Humboldt, 1969.
Liberals highly praise toleration, and it forms a crucial part of the liberal agenda. By the end of the 18th century, a specifically liberal understanding of toleration had formed. This understanding was influenced by three different schools of thought. Nova, can you tell us these three?
Sure, Viper. The first point is about understanding how crucial toleration is for maintaining peace in society. This idea started to take shape slowly after the Reformation and the religious wars that followed. The second point is about a fundamental principle of respecting religious conscience. This idea really started to bloom during the 17th and 18th centuries, particularly in the works of some Protestant dissenters. The third point is about the concept of separating church and state. This eventually became the most practical solution to the power struggle between political and religious authorities that was sparked by the Reformation.
When you combine these three elements, they form the heart of a liberal view of political tolerance. In this view, we can achieve political stability by keeping religious beliefs out of politics and public debates, letting them exist in the private realm of individuals. During the 16th and the 17th centuries, Europe was a battleground for religious wars. Protestant reformers showed they were just as capable of persecuting those they considered heretics as the Catholic Church was. As a practical solution to these conflicts, the conception of toleration started to take hold. Alright, that concludes this chapter. It was pretty short, but I think you got the point nonetheless. Let's get to democracy and constitutions. Before we continue, I have to advertise this channel a bit more. This video was really a lot of work. It would really help me out if you would like, comment and subscribe. Even though the noun liberal democracy is thrown around a lot, liberalism does not contain a distinctive theory of democracy. Interestingly, despite them advocating for government by consent, many early liberals were uncertain or conflicted when it came to democracy. This suspicion towards democracy often had its roots in the worry that populism might endanger freedom and individuality. Some also worried that including uneducated voters as political equals might be destabilizing or even dangerous. However, by the end of the 19th century, democracy had become more and more incorporated in liberal theory. The term democratic self-government began to take shape. What's self-government, Nova?
Self-government is a system in which the citizens of a city, state, or country have the power to govern themselves and make their own laws. This means that the people, either directly or through elected representatives, have the authority to decide on legislation, public policies, and actions affecting their welfare. In a self-governing system, the power to govern comes from the people themselves, rather than being imposed by an external authority. This is often achieved through democratic processes where citizens have the right to vote on who represents them and makes decisions on their behalf. In essence, self-government is about having control over the decisions that affect your community and your life, and being able to participate in making those decisions. It's a fundamental principle of democratic societies and is key to ensuring freedom, justice, and equality.
In general, liberals tend to be skeptical about citizens directly participating in governing themselves. They usually favor a system of representative democracy, where political positions are filled through regular elections. One of the big advantages of representative democracy from a liberal perspective is that it safeguards individual interests by making sure government actions are transparent and public. Plus, it allows for a variety of opinions to be expressed. Liberals strongly commit to constitutionalism, because constitutions make sure that the government is limited and protect the rights and freedoms of individuals. Nova, can you quickly explain what constitutions are?
A constitution is like the rule book for a country. It lays out the basic principles that the country is based on, and it sets up the main structures of the government. The Constitution also describes how different parts of the government should interact with each other. For example, it might explain how the president, the Congress, and the courts should work together. Another important part of the Constitution is that it sets limits on what the government can do. This is to make sure that the government doesn't become too powerful and start infringing on people's rights. And speaking of rights, the Constitution also usually includes a section that spells out the rights and duties of the citizens. This could include things like the right to free speech, the right to a fair trial, and the duty to obey the law. So, in a nutshell, a constitution is the fundamental set of rules that guide how a country is governed.
Nova hinted at something that is also important to liberal constitutionalism: the separation of powers. I'm sure you know about this, but the crucial idea is that if the judicial, executive, and legislative branches of government are separated out, power is less likely to be concentrated. This means that liberty is protected and the tyrannical rule is less likely. Another interesting thing the book mentions is that, I quote, "Liberalism has often been connected with a negative theory of freedom, in which freedom consists in the absence of external obstructions or interference." Nova, can you elaborate on the negative theory of freedom?
Of course. The negative theory of freedom, often associated with liberalism, is all about the idea of freedom from interference. In the context of lawmaking, this theory often comes up when we're talking about individual rights and liberties. For example, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, and freedom of movement are all based on this idea of negative freedom. It's about creating laws that prevent others, including the government, from interfering with these freedoms. In the broader context of liberalism, negative freedom is a key principle. Liberals often argue against too much government intervention, saying that it can limit our negative freedoms. They believe that each person should have the freedom to live their life as they choose, without unnecessary interference from others or the government. Okay, I'm done here. Next chapter.
In this chapter, we'll have a look at some of the different strands that have developed within liberalism. There are 2 points which are especially worth diving deeper in. The first is liberalism's evolvement in the matter of social distributive justice. Specifically, it highlights a growing divide between liberal egalitarians and libertarians, both groups claiming to be the proper successor of liberal theory. The second is the interaction of liberalism with various other ideological movements such as feminism, nationalism, and multiculturalism. Nova, can you give us some insights on distributive justice?
Social or distributive justice concerns the allocation of the benefits and burdens of social cooperation, including such things as opportunities, resources, and welfare. Contemporary liberals disagree both about how these should be distributed and about whether or not justice permits their redistribution.
Let's talk about the view of liberal egalitarians on distributive justice. Liberal egalitarians such as John Rawls, Roland Dworkin, and Brian Barry argue that there is a strong case supporting equal distribution. They view equality, or the equality of opportunity, as a fundamental principle of liberalism. As a result, their work contradicts a long-standing criticism from the left wing, which accuses liberals of being unconcerned about the distribution of wealth and property. Nova, can you tell us more about how John Rawls envisioned society?
There are 2 principles from John Rawls's theory of justice, as outlined in his work, A Theory of Justice. They form the core of his conception of justice, often referred to as justice as fairness. The first principle, known as the principle of equal basic liberties, states that each person has an equal right to a fully adequate scheme of equal basic liberties, which is compatible with a similar scheme of liberties for all. The second principle, known as the difference principle, deals with social and economic inequalities. It states that these inequalities should satisfy two conditions. First, they should be attached to offices and positions open to all under conditions of fair equality of opportunity. Second, they should be to the greatest benefit of the least advantaged members of society. These principles are designed to ensure that all individuals have basic rights and opportunities, and that any social and economic inequalities are arranged to benefit those who are least advantaged. They form the basis of Rawls's vision of a just society.
I think this gives you a good idea about how egalitarian liberals think. The first principle Nova mentioned is common amongst all types of liberalism, while the second one is specifically egalitarian. Liberal egalitarians agree that equality is a fundamental liberal value and conclude that a liberal theory of social justice will be broadly egalitarian in character. Now let's get to libertarians. Libertarians believe that liberal egalitarianism, as well as social liberalism, are a perversion of liberalism. This is because they argue that theories of social justice are incompatible with individual freedom. Libertarians prefer a view on justice in which property rights play a more significant role. They also rule out taxation for the purpose of redistributing wealth and opportunities. John Rawls, who we already heard some things about, had a well-known libertarian critic called Robert Nozick. Specifically, he pointed out two things. Nova, your turn.
First, Nozick pointed out that goods are produced by people, who have presumptive rights of ownership over them. As such, they are not unattached and up for redistribution in whatever way the theorist decides. Second, Nozick claimed that patterned principles of justice were incompatible with freedom. He argued that preserving a liberal egalitarian distribution of resources will require that the state either continually interfere to stop people from transferring resources as they wish to, or continually, or periodically, interfere to take from some person's resources that others for some reason chose to transfer to them. Robert Nozick, 1974, Anarchy, State and Utopia.
As I told you, liberal egalitarians favor a welfare state. Libertarians, like Nozick, however, favor a minimal state. The obligation of this minimal state should be upholding property rights. The fundamental concept is that if individuals have rightfully obtained property rights over certain things, then those things should belong to them, and they can use them as they wish. The state should refrain from meddling in consensual activities, and it doesn't have the right to levy taxes on free transactions, including paid work. The state's responsibility is to safeguard individuals from theft, fraud, and other infringements of rights, rather than offer welfare policy tools like a public health or education system. If you remember, I said that the second distinctive feature of contemporary liberalism are the fusions with other ideologies. For example, liberal feminism, liberal nationalism, and liberal multiculturalism. Let's dive deeper into that topic. Most ideologies from the past have neglected gender. Liberalism was no exception. However, there was an important figure called Mary Wollstonecraft. She published the text A Vindication of the Rights of Women in 1792. This is an essential text for both liberal and feminist traditions. Nova, drop some knowledge.
Wollstonecraft harnessed the revolutionary ideas of the Enlightenment to powerfully challenge gender inequality in 18th century Britain, protesting against the barring of women from professional fields and public life. She contended that restricting women to the home and private spaces had a detrimental impact on their ability to think logically and fostered behaviors that eroded women's self-reliance and self-determination.
Another important early liberal feminist text was good old John Stuart Mill's The Subjection of Women, published in 1869. Mill portrayed the inferior legal position of women in the 19th century Britain as a form of slavery and argued against the prevailing conservative belief that gender inequality was natural. In recent times, leading advocates of liberal feminism like Susan Moller and Martha Nussbaum have employed the key principles of liberalism, rights, freedom, and equality to criticize the ongoing presence of gender inequality in contemporary society. These authors interpret gender inequality as a failure to uphold the values of liberalism. Liberal feminism has not been criticized or sparked much controversy among liberals. However, some feminists have voiced doubts about whether liberalism can fully comprehend and address the profound feminist criticism of patriarchal systems. Let's talk about liberal nationalism. A distinctive theory of liberal nationalism has developed over the past 20 to 30 years. Nova, what's the arguments of liberal nationalists?
Advocates typically argue one of 2 points. They either contend that nationalism, or certain types of it, are in harmony with liberalism, implying that liberals can also be nationalists. Or they assert that key liberal objectives, such as democracy, social trust, and individual autonomy, rely on the existence of a shared national culture, suggesting that liberals ought to be nationalist.
Thanks, that concludes liberal nationalism. Let's have another quick look at liberal multiculturalism. This ideology is quite new, and generally one can say that advocates of liberal multiculturalism argue that individuals from minority cultures should have rights that are specific to their group. This is to enable them to maintain their unique identities and lifestyles. Okay, that's it for the contemporary forms of liberalism. Keep in mind that the information is a general overview, and every single offshoot of liberalism is a complex topic on its own. And if any of these ideologies interest you, I would suggest conducting further research. Alright, congratulations, you almost made it. Here's the conclusion of this video. Liberalism has quite a few different strands, which make it difficult to pinpoint its distinctive ideological features. For example, liberals can take positions on the left and the right-wing spectrum. They also disagree about things like the nature and extent of property rights, the role and morality of the marketplace, and the role and obligations of the government. However, this flexibility of the ideology allows it to adapt to shifting political circumstances through ideological innovation and hybrid variants such as liberal feminism. As pointed out, there are 2 main themes which are present in all liberal thought: individualism and toleration, even though liberal individualism draws from a variety of competing intellectual sources. It's their shared dedication to individualism that binds liberals together and distinguishes their tradition from ideologies that prioritize the collective good over the individual. However, the interpretation of individualism for liberalism are debated. People like Spencer, Hayek, and modern libertarians and neoliberals argue that a focus on individual freedom obligates liberalism to adhere to the principle of laissez-faire and the minimal state. On the other hand, new liberals, social liberals, and other liberal egalitarians believe that a commitment to individual welfare obligates liberalism to uphold principles of distributive justice and a welfare state. Liberal toleration merges 2 key concepts. Firstly, it embraces the idea that social diversity surpasses social uniformity and individuals should be given extensive freedom in deciding their life paths. Secondly, just like individualism, the liberal commitment to toleration is derived from a variety of intellectual origins. Liberal theories of toleration are currently facing 2 significant challenges. The first challenge revolves around the boundaries of toleration, specifically the complex issue of determining which behaviors and practices should be tolerated. The second challenge questions whether toleration is sufficient for minority groups who might be tolerated but still find it objectionable to face social disapproval. The future significance of liberalism will largely depend on the ability of liberals to address these challenges, as well as their capacity to formulate principles of justice suitable for a globalized economy. Alright! Congratulations, you made it. I hope you didn't fall asleep like in middle school. Maybe you did, maybe you didn't. I really appreciate everybody that watched this. And like I said, comment which ideology I should cover next. You can also give me feedback on the video, and you can tell me what other videos you would like to see. I don't have to do political content, I can also do other content. I would love to hear your opinion, and yeah, if you subscribed, welcome to the community. We are a minority right now, but I'm sure we will grow. And thank you. Bye bye. See you in the next video.